I was 20 years old when I thought I had everything figured out. Love felt simple back then, almost naive in its certainty. I married Emily after 3 years of dating, convinced that whatever storms life threw at us, we'd weather them hand in hand. A year into our marriage, our twin daughters were born two tiny miracles who instantly became the center of our world. The complications from the pregnancy were serious. For a few weeks, we weren't sure Emily would fully recover. When doctors told us it might be difficult for her to have more children, I didn't care. I already had everything I wanted: two beautiful girls and a wife I believed loved me as fiercely as I loved her. If someone had told me then that our marriage would crumble, I wouldn't have believed them. We stayed married for 9 years. Then, in the span of a few shattering days, everything collapsed. Infidelity isn't a word you expect to attach to the person you once imagined growing old with. But the moment I learned the truth, every detail, every lie that had led up to it was as if someone had reached into my chest and coldly extinguished whatever love I had left. I didn't rage. I didn't fall apart. Something inside me simply stopped. And from that point on, my marriage was over. The divorce was brutal in its emotional weight, though practical matters went surprisingly smoothly. The only thing we fought for was the girls. And even then, fought is the wrong word. I would never rip them away from their mother. We agreed on joint custody, and I promised myself that no matter how I felt about Emily, I would never let the girls suffer for it. But the thing about healing is that it doesn't happen on the same timeline for everyone involved. I moved on years ago. Emily did not. For 7 years after the divorce, she didn't date. She didn't try to build a new life. She became a static presence, still, patient, almost suspended in time. And I didn't care. Truly. Whatever she did or didn't do after the marriage was none of my business, unless it affected our daughters. Yet somehow over the years, she used the girls as her emotional tether. Soft words, subtle suggestions, hopeful sighs, tiny things children might not fully understand but still absorb. And while I was rebuilding myself with therapy, support, and sheer willpower, Emily was, consciously or not, weaving a fantasy in their minds that one day their parents would find their way back to each other. I didn't know how deeply this fantasy had taken root until much later. For a long time, it didn't disrupt our routines. The girls mentioned their mother in passing, like any children would. Sometimes they'd comment that she looked nice in a photo or tell me she seemed happier lately. I ignored it. Kids talk, after all. But then things shifted, because I finally met someone. Clemence came into my life gradually. We shared a hobby for years, laughing, competing, cheering each other on. Friendship grew naturally, easily. When it finally tipped into something deeper, I was terrified. Terrified because a part of me feared I had lost the ability to truly love after what happened. But I hadn't. She showed me that. And the moment my daughters realized my feelings for Clemence were serious, not casual, not temporary, the pressure started. They came home early from their mother's house more often. They'd walk in, see Clemence sitting beside me or helping me cook, and the questions began. What is she doing here? Does mom know? This isn't fair to her. As if loving someone new was an attack. As if moving forward was a betrayal. I tried talking to them once, twice, a dozen times. But the fantasy their mother had nurtured for years spoiled those conversations before they even began. Still, I didn't blame them. They were kids. Kids who loved both their parents and didn't understand why adults couldn't simply fit back together, like puzzle pieces that had once matched. I blamed their mother. And yet, blaming didn't change anything. By the time I realized just how tangled everything had become, I was running out of ideas, out of words, out of ways to help my daughters see the truth. I wasn't going back. Not then, not ever. But every explanation I gave them seemed to slide off, like water off glass. Something had to break before anything could heal. And it did, just not in a way I expected. The first time my daughters questioned Clemence's presence, it was almost innocent. They came home earlier than usual, something about a schedule change I hadn't been told about, and found the two of us in the living room, drinking tea and laughing over something trivial. The moment they stepped through the door, the air shifted. They stiffened. Clemence offered them a warm smile and a quiet greeting, but the girls exchanged a look I couldn't quite decipher. Later that evening, when Clemence had gone home, they cornered me in the kitchen. Dad, what was she doing here? It wasn't the question itself that unsettled me, it was the tone. An uneasy blend of suspicion and disappointment, as if I'd been caught breaking a rule none of us had ever written down. She's my friend, I said carefully. We were spending time together. My younger daughter crossed her arms. But you never have people over when we're home. It wasn't true, though I realized, suddenly, that I had subconsciously avoided inviting anyone around when they were visiting. Part of it was habit. Part of it was a desire to keep their emotional world as stable as possible. And part of it, I admit, was fear of exactly the conversation I was now having. There's nothing wrong with me having company, I told them gently. You're getting older. I'm allowed to have a life outside of being your dad. They didn't argue that night, but the silence they gave me was worse. In the weeks that followed, the tension grew thicker, like humidity before a storm. Every time Clemence stayed over for dinner, every time she laughed at my jokes, every time she reached over to squeeze my hand, I could feel the girls watching, evaluating, judging. And eventually, the comments began. This feels wrong. Mom wouldn't like this. It's unfair to her. Unfair? To the woman who had shattered our marriage? I didn't say it aloud. I refused to make my daughters pick between us. They were still innocent in all this, even if their mother wasn't. One evening, after another emotionally exhausting round of these conversations, I sat them both down. No distractions, no rushing through it. I need you to listen, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I know you love your mom, and she loves you. But your mom and I are not getting back together. Ever. My older daughter frowned, confused. But why? Mom said. I raised a hand before she could finish. What your mom hopes for and what is real are two different things. People can care about someone and still not belong together anymore. They looked unconvinced, but I continued. I deserve happiness, and so does your mother, and so do the two of you. But none of that comes from pretending a broken marriage can be glued together. I thought, foolishly, that my honesty might reach them. Instead, the next question they asked nearly knocked the wind out of me. Is it because Mom cheated? I froze. I had never told them. I had never wanted to. They were older now, yes, but still young enough that I hated the idea of staining their memories with something so painful. And yet, their mother had already told them years before. They'd been carrying that knowledge in silence. Yes, I said softly. That's part of it. But the bigger part is that the love I had for your mother ended when that happened. It didn't fade. It didn't change. It ended. They exchanged another look, this one filled with something I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not sadness, something like stubborn hope. But she's faithful now, my younger daughter whispered. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my forehead. Sweetheart, it's not possible to be faithful to someone you're no longer with. They ignored that. They dismissed every gentle explanation. And that's when I realized how deeply their mother's words had settled into them, like sediment at the bottom of a river. They weren't acting out of malice. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were clinging to a version of our family their mother had painted for them, and children, even half-grown ones, will always try to believe in what they're told, especially when it comes from someone they love. Still, knowing that didn't make things easier. Something in our dynamic began to shift after that. The girls weren't openly hostile, but they carried an uneasy tension around me, like they were waiting for me to change my mind, to take back everything I'd said. They watched Clemence more closely than ever, studied her, measured how I looked at her, how we interacted, searching for cracks maybe, or signs that I wasn't serious. But I was serious. For the first time in years. And that seriousness only made their resistance grow. The truth was becoming undeniable. My daughters were living in a story that wasn't mine and wasn't reality. And unless something changed, that story was going to break all of us. Life settled into a strange rhythm, one where every day felt like walking through a house still haunted by a marriage long dead. It wasn't that my daughters were unkind. They still hugged me goodnight, still joked during breakfast, still asked me about school or handed me their phones to fix something. But there was a distance beneath it all, a quiet strain that threaded itself through our conversations. They were waiting for me to come to my senses, I suppose. Waiting for the moment I would realize that Clemence was a mistake and that their mother was the rightful place my heart belonged. Their mother made sure that fantasy stayed alive. I noticed it in small ways at first. The girls mentioning that she looked really beautiful today, or that she seemed so much happier lately. I saw the patterns, the careful phrasing too mature for their age, but too emotional to be their own. Emily wasn't pushing them with force. She was guiding them with softness. The softest manipulations are often the strongest. Occasionally, they would show me pictures their mother had taken, glamorous, carefully staged, wearing clothes I had never seen her wear during our marriage. She seemed younger in those pictures, almost glowing. It was obvious she was putting on a performance not for herself, not for the world, but for me, via them. And for a while, I let it go. I didn't want to poison the girls with bitterness. I didn't want them to see their mother through the same lens I saw her. Children deserve love, not adult grudges. But denial has a way of piling up, layer by layer, until it becomes impossible to ignore. One evening, after picking them up from her place, I noticed the quiet right away. They slid into the back seat, buckled their seatbelts, and stared out the windows. I drove halfway home before I realized they weren't talking at all. "You two okay back there?" They exchanged a glance, one of those silent conversations siblings have. "Dad," my older daughter finally said, "why didn't you try again, with Mom?" I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "Try what again?" "Your marriage," Mom said. "She said she regrets everything." I had to bite my tongue to keep from cursing. "Regret doesn't erase the past," I said carefully. "But people can change," my younger daughter insisted. "She has changed. She hasn't dated anyone. She's been waiting." Waiting. The word landed like a stone in my stomach. Waiting for whom? For me? For a version of me that no longer exists? I pulled the car over, put it in park, and turned to face them. "Listen," I said softly. "Your mom's choices are her own. My choices are mine. What happened between us happened because of decisions. She made decisions that hurt our marriage deeply. I didn't leave because I wanted to. I left because I had to. Staying would have destroyed me." Silence. They didn't cry. They didn't protest. They just looked at me. And for the first time, I realized something heartbreaking. They had never seen the real cracks in our marriage. They had never witnessed the coldness, the distance, the rejection. They only remembered the warm parts, the parts worth keeping. Maybe that was a blessing. Maybe it was a curse. I tried again, gentler this time. "You know I love you both, more than anything. But my relationship with your mother ended years ago. And I've moved on. Truly." "Because of her?" my younger daughter asked, almost accusingly. "Because of Clemens?" "No," I said honestly. "Because of what happened. Because of who I became after the divorce. Clemens came much later. She didn't take anything from your mother. Your mother had already given it away." It was the closest I had ever come to speaking the raw truth. They went quiet again, but this time it wasn't tense silence, it was heavy. Thoughtful. Like they were trying to fit two puzzle pieces together and discovering, for the first time, that they didn't match. But just as I allowed myself the hope that our talk had made some difference, the pattern returned. Small questions, doubts, comments about their mother's faithfulness, hints that she still dreamed of a reunion. Emily was still whispering her version of the story into their ears, soft and insistent, and my words, truthful, painful, necessary, were being drowned out by it. Clemence noticed the shift before I did. One night, after the girls had gone to bed, she sat beside me on the couch and traced her fingers along the back of my hand. "They're afraid," she murmured. "Afraid of what?" "Losing their family again." I let out a slow breath. "They already lost it." "No," she said, shaking her head. "They lost the marriage, but not the idea of it, not the comfort of thinking it could come back." Her insight struck deep. She was right. My daughters weren't fighting me. They were fighting the fear of losing something that had been gone for years, but that their mother kept pretending was still alive. And I didn't yet know how to save them from that. But I knew one thing, even then. If something didn't change soon, the house full of ghosts we were living in would become unbearable. The turning point didn't arrive with a dramatic explosion. No slammed doors, no screaming matches, no storms in the night. It came quietly, like most real disasters do, slipping into our lives through an accumulation of small, painful moments that eventually tipped the balance too far. It started on a Saturday afternoon when the girls were supposed to be at their mother's place. Clemence and I were cooking together, moving around the kitchen in the easy, comfortable rhythm we'd naturally developed over the months. Music played softly, the scent of garlic filled the air, and for the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely light. Then the front door opened. I didn't hear footsteps at first, only the abrupt silence from Clemence as she looked past me. When I turned, the girls were standing there, eyes wide, expressions stiff with something between shock and disappointment. "You're early," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. "Mom said we could come home sooner," my older daughter replied, her tone guarded. Clemence gave them her usual warm smile, but something about the moment was fragile, precarious. The girls stared at her, then at me, as though catching us in the middle of a crime. "What are you making?" my younger daughter asked. But the question didn't sound curious, it sounded accusatory, as if the meal itself was evidence. "Pasta?" Clemence replied gently. "Your dad's been helping." "We didn't ask you," my older daughter snapped before she could finish. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. I stepped in immediately. "Hey, that's not acceptable. Apologize." But they didn't. Instead, they looked at me as if I had betrayed them. Clemence excused herself quietly and slipped onto the balcony, giving us space. I faced the girls, anger and exhaustion warring in my chest. "What's going on?" My older daughter's voice trembled, not with fear, but with indignation. You're acting like she's part of our family, like she belongs here. She does, I said simply. That did it. My younger daughter burst into tears. What about Mom? She choked out. She's trying so hard. She still loves you. She told us she wishes you'd come home. There it was, the confession, the confirmation I'd dreaded. I leaned back against the counter and took a slow breath. Girls, you need to understand something. Your mom and I divorced because she broke our marriage. Not once, not by accident, but over time. I didn't leave because I stopped caring. I left because I had no choice. They were crying now, quiet, desperate tears. But she regrets it, my older daughter whispered. She told us she'd do anything to fix it. Some things, I said softly, can't be fixed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't snap. But something in my tone must have carried the truth more clearly than ever, because they both froze. Their expressions changed, not anger this time, but confusion, hurt, a deep, aching incomprehension. You don't see it, I continued. You were kids when everything happened. You didn't see the coldness, the distance, the way she pulled away from me long before I knew why. You saw the good moments, and I'm glad you did, but you didn't see the rest. They looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. And Clemence? My younger daughter asked through tears. Do you love her? Yes, I said. I do. The truth seemed to hit them harder than anything else. My older daughter sank into a chair. So that's it? You're just done with Mom? I've been done for years, I said gently. I just haven't said it loudly enough. Silence wrapped around us like fog, the kind that makes everything feel distant, muted. When Clemence stepped back inside a few minutes later, the girls wouldn't even look at her. They went to their rooms without another word. That night, after they fell asleep, Clemence and I sat on the couch, not touching, just breathing in the quiet heaviness between us. They're hurting, she whispered. I know. And you can't fix the hurt without telling them the whole truth. That was the part I'd been avoiding. The truth wasn't simple. It was jagged and painful and ugly. And though I'd tried to tell them the gentle version, Emily's narrative had wrapped itself around their hearts too tightly for half-truths to break through. But the full story, the real one, felt cruel to impose on them. They're still kids, I murmured. They're old enough, Clemence said softly. Old enough to deserve the truth. Old enough to stop being used. Her words stayed with me long after she went home. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, realizing the truth I hadn't wanted to face. I couldn't protect my daughters from the past anymore. But I also couldn't let the past define their future. Something had to give. And soon, very soon, everything would. I didn't intend for them to find the post. I'd written it months earlier, late at night, when frustration and helplessness had boiled over into a kind of desperate honesty. I posted it anonymously in an online support community, hoping for perspective, advice, anything that might help me navigate the growing rift between me and my daughters. I never imagined they would stumble across it. It happened on a quiet weekday evening. I'd just gotten home from work, set down my keys, and called out a greeting. There was no answer. I found them in the living room, both of them, sitting close together on the couch. Their eyes were red, their faces streaked with tears. My older daughter was holding her phone like it had burned her hands trembling. My heart dropped. What happened? I asked. They looked at me with a mix of devastation and guilt that made my breath catch. We read something, my younger daughter whispered, about you. I didn't understand at first. Then, my older daughter turned the screen toward me. There it was, my post, my words, every raw detail I had kept from them, laid bare for strangers now exposed to my own children. My stomach twisted. I sat down slowly, pressing my hands together, trying to steady my voice. How did you even find this? We're in that community, my older daughter said. We read stories there all the time. We never thought... Her voice broke. Dad, why didn't you tell us the truth? I closed my eyes for a moment. Because the truth is ugly, and I didn't want to put that weight on you. But we needed to know, my younger daughter said, her voice shaking. We needed to understand. And then, before I could say anything more, both of them threw themselves into my arms, sobbing so hard their bodies shook. They held on to me like I was the only solid thing in their world. Dad, we're so sorry, my older daughter cried against my shoulder. We didn't know how much it hurt you. We didn't know what she did. We didn't know any of it. I wrapped my arms around them, feeling my own chest tighten, not with pain this time, but with a kind of sorrowful relief. You didn't do anything wrong, I whispered. None of this is your fault. But Mom, my younger daughter began, then stopped, choking on the rest. She made it sound like you just gave up. I felt something inside me twist. Not anger, just the sad confirmation of what I'd suspected for years. She told you her version, I said gently. The version she could live with. They pulled back slightly, tears streaming. We were so unfair to you, my older daughter whispered. We pushed you. We blamed you. And all this time, you were hurting because of her. Sweetheart, I said, cupping her face. You were children. You believed the person you trusted. I don't blame you for that. I never did. We sat together for a long time, the room silent except for the occasional shaky breath. When their sobbing finally quieted, we talked, really talked for the first time in years. I told them everything I had kept behind a locked door in my heart. Not the cruel details, not the bitterness, just the truth. How I had tried to reach their mother emotionally. How she distanced herself for months. How intimacy vanished, affection evaporated, and every attempt I made was pushed away. How I discovered the affair not through drama, but through heartbreaking patterns that finally couldn't be ignored. They listened without interrupting. And when I finished, they didn't look confused anymore. They didn't look angry. They looked older. As if the truth had removed a veil they didn't realize they'd been wearing. My younger daughter whispered, She used us, didn't she? To make you come back. I hesitated. Then I nodded. Maybe not consciously. Maybe she didn't mean to hurt you. But yes, she involved you in something you should never have been part of. It broke them. But it also freed them. That night, we ended up curled together on the couch, their heads resting on my shoulders, my arms around them. They asked questions, gentle, painful questions, and I answered honestly, but carefully. By the time they finally went to bed, something fundamental had shifted between us. A wall had fallen, one I hadn't even realized was so tall. Clemens texted later asking if everything was okay. For the first time in a long while, I replied with something close to hope. We're finally talking. Really talking. But the fallout wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because the next step, the hardest one, would be confronting the person who had created years of confusion and heartache. And that was a conversation I could no longer avoid. I had imagined this conversation with Emily more times than I could count. In every version, I walked away feeling lighter, clearer, finally able to close the door that had been left cracked open for years. But imagining a conversation and actually walking into it are two very different things. And on that particular afternoon, as I stood in front of her house, I felt the weight of 7 years pressing against my ribs. I knocked once. She opened immediately as if she had been waiting behind the door, listening for my footsteps. Her eyes softened when she saw me, that same mixture of hope and longing she'd carried since the divorce. A look that used to twist my stomach. Now it only made me tired. We should talk inside, I said. She stepped back, and I walked into a living room I barely recognized anymore. The furniture was the same, but the air felt different. Stagnant. Like the room itself had been holding its breath. What's going on? She asked, trying to sound casual, but failing. The girls wouldn't tell me anything. They found my post, I said. The one about the divorce. Her face drained of color. She sat down slowly, as if her knees had given out. They read it? Yes. For several seconds, she said nothing, only stared at the floor, hands trembling. I never wanted them to hear it like that. You never wanted them to hear it at all, I said. There's a difference. Her chin trembled. I just wanted to protect them. Emily, I said, sitting across from her. They weren't being protected. They were being misled. For years. She looked up sharply, guilt flooding her expression. I didn't lie. You didn't tell the truth either. The words landed between us like a stone. You let them believe I walked away without reason. You let them think reconciliation was possible. You let them push me to come back to you because you wanted that fantasy alive. Her eyes filled with tears. I wasn't trying to manipulate them. Maybe you didn't mean to, but you did. My voice softened, but I didn't look away. They've spent years carrying a hope that shouldn't have existed. She wiped her cheeks, getting angry at herself for crying. I never stopped loving you. It wasn't the confession she thought it was. Once it would have shattered me. Now it felt like a sentence belonging to a different life. "You didn't love me when you shut me out," I said quietly. "You didn't love me when you sought comfort somewhere else. And you definitely didn't love me when you let our daughters become messengers for something that was already dead." The words broke something in her. She hunched forward, elbows on her knees, crying into her hands, not in a dramatic way, but in the exhausted way of someone finally facing a truth they'd been running from. "I didn't realize how much harm I caused," she whispered. "They're old enough to see it now," I said. "And it hurt them. But at least now they understand what happened." She nodded shakily. "They've been talking about Clemence a lot lately. They like her." "They do," I said, "because they finally feel free to." Emily gave a small pained laugh. "I guess that means you love her." "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I do." She inhaled sharply, the sound almost a sob. But she didn't argue. She didn't accuse. She just sagged deeper into the couch, deflated. "So what now?" she asked. "What am I supposed to do?" "Stop giving them hope about us," I said. "No more hints. No more maybe someday. Let them build their lives without your expectations weighing on them." She nodded slowly. "I understand." "And one more thing," I added. "Let them love you without conditions. Don't make your relationship with them rest on what you wanted from me." It took her a long time to answer, but when she did, her voice was steady. "You're right. I'm sorry, truly. I forgave you a long time ago," I said. "But forgiveness isn't the same as going back." When I finally stood to leave, she didn't stop me. She just watched with eyes that finally, after 7 long years, held acceptance instead of denial. The air outside felt different, lighter, cleaner, as if the world itself had exhaled. Driving home, I realized something surprising. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't even sad. I felt free. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to look forward instead of back. Because now, at last, the past was no longer holding on to me. The months after that difficult conversation slipped by with a strange, unfamiliar calm. For the first time since the divorce, life didn't feel like something I had to brace myself for. There were no whispers from the girls about giving their mother another chance. No awkward comments. No tension simmering beneath every family interaction. It was as if the air in our home had finally been cleared of a storm that had lingered too long. The girls changed almost immediately. It was subtle at first, more relaxed shoulders, fewer guarded looks, quieter dinners without the underlying question of where their loyalty should lie. But soon the change became impossible to ignore. They talked more. They laughed more. They asked about Clemence without testing my reaction, without watching me from the corner of their eye as if waiting for me to slip. They began treating her not as an intruder, but as part of our world. One evening, I came home from work to find all 3 of them sitting on the couch. The girls were showing Clemence their childhood photos, pointing out every embarrassing haircut and ridiculous outfit their grandmother forced on them. Clemence laughed loud, open, completely at ease. When she saw me in the doorway, she smiled the way she always did, warm enough to melt whatever remained of the cold years behind me. At that moment, I realized that this, quietly and steadily, had become my life. A life that wasn't defined by betrayal or bitterness, but by small joys I almost forgot I could feel. It was that feeling that pushed me toward the idea of proposing. Not because I needed to replace the past, but because I finally felt ready to build something new, something chosen, not inherited. I started planning, looking at rings, imagining how to tell the girls, choosing the right moment. But Clemence, in her usual way, saw straight through me. She waited until a calm Saturday evening when the girls were out with friends and the house was unusually still. She asked me to go for a walk. The sun was low, coloring everything gold, and the air carried that soft promise of early spring. We stopped on a small hill overlooking the city, a place we'd visited often during our years as friends. She turned to me, took my hands, and said, "You don't always have to be the one to hold the weight. Let me do something for you this time." Then she proposed. The world didn't stop, but something inside me did. It wasn't shock, not really. It was a different kind of feeling, one I had never experienced before. The sensation of being chosen by someone who saw all of me and wanted me still, not out of guilt or fear or desperation, but out of genuine, grounding love. I said yes. Of course I said yes. The girls' reaction was even more overwhelming. They didn't scream or squeal like I expected. Instead, they hugged us both so fiercely I could barely breathe. It was as if they were saying, "Thank you for choosing happiness. Thank you for not giving up on love. Thank you for letting us be part of it." The wedding was small, just close friends and the people who stuck by us when life split itself open. During the ceremony, one of my daughters slipped her hand into mine. "You look happy," she whispered. "I am," I said. "Because you are." And it was true. All the years of confusion and pain had shaped them, but they hadn't broken. They had grown stronger, kinder, more compassionate. They had learned that love isn't a chain binding two people who no longer belong together. It is something you choose, day after day, honestly and freely. A few weeks after the wedding, we received the news that Clemence was pregnant. I told the girls first. They screamed that time, laughing, crying, talking over each other about names and colors for the nursery, and who would teach their new sibling how to ride a bike. To see them excited, not threatened or confused, was the final sign that the past had released them too. Sometimes I think back to the man I used to be angry, hurt, convinced that something inside me had been permanently damaged. I wish I could reach back and tell him that his story wasn't ending. It was just reshaping itself. That healing wasn't about forgetting what happened, but about choosing what comes next. Now, as I sit in the living room with my daughters arguing over baby clothes on one side and Clemency resting her head on my shoulder on the other, I finally understand something that took me years to learn. Moving on isn't turning away from the past. It's choosing not to carry it into the future. And for the first time in a very long time, the future feels bright.